Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me. As always, across the way, as usual, is Mr. Jeff Abercrombie. Jeff, recording this on Sunday night. Sunday Night Football's on in the background. College football season, week 4 in the books. How are you doing this evening, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well. I've got the football game on record, so I'll come back and I'll watch the end of it. And 49ers playing, right? So that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. Garoppolo back in the saddle there, unfortunately, due to the Trey Lance injury. And Russell Wilson and the Broncos can't really seem to get it going too much. A lot of the same in terms of stagnant offense like it was in Seattle. Starting to wonder, maybe it wasn't that Seattle offense a little bit, but that might be a conversation for another day. We're here to deliver the NFL stock report, at least to start the show. With the Devy Slant before we kind of transition over to some NFL stuff. So maybe Russell's name comes up a little bit later on if we got some time. But let's get right into it because I do think it was a little bit of an interesting week in terms of college football. And let's start at the quarterback position this week because I do think there were some significant names and some performances to talk about. I know we were talking a little bit about off air, but DJ Uiagalelei out of Clemson yesterday, really high scoring game between Clemson and Wake Forest. Uiagalelei, 26 of 41, 371 yards, 5 touchdowns, another 52 yards rushing. Against him, Sam Hartman, really impressive game, 337 yards and 6 touchdowns. Defenses really was surprised that Clemson's defense, was basically manhandled by Wake Forest at times in that game. They could not slow down Hartman, but Clemson and Uiagalelei were up to the task, and it was nice to kind of see Clemson win a game like this. Like, we haven't seen them have an offensive explosion like this. And listen, I think Uiagalelei still has his flaws, right? There's still some consistency issues that I think we see at times. And, if we haven't talked much about him during this season. Obviously, we talked about him before the season started. But I still think there is those highs and those lows. You see the natural raw tools, you see the athleticism, and then this was his best, I think, statistical game he's probably ever put up in college football. But even during it, there are moments that you see, and in terms of a little bit of inaccuracy or ball placement issues at times, still kind of pop up a little bit. But I was impressed with this performance, and I think it's the kind of performance to kind of at least put him back in the spotlight of there's a lot of tools here to work with. When I've always watched him play, and this is from 2 years ago, everything about him reminds me so much of when Dak Prescott was coming out. And I remember Dak Prescott was a day 3 pick, so it wasn't like he was this clean prospect. And Uiagalelei may be on his way to being a day 3 guy. Maybe he can work his way back into the mix, in terms of day 2 or whatever. But any thoughts on Uiagalelei or Hartman from that game? Because I do feel like it was besides the Florida-Tennessee game, which we'll talk about those guys in a second, I think it was one of the marquee games this weekend, Clemson, Wake Forest, and the quarterback duel that we saw.
Yeah, and it didn't disappoint, right? I mean, double overtime, so you're going to get some inflated stats there. Also, I think you mentioned the Clemson's defense just living in the backfield. So what Hartman did, was a higher degree of difficulty, right? Uiagalelei, he's generally in a pretty good pocket for most of the game. And, credit to him, he's hanging in there and surveying and going across the field and back to find an open guy. So he did play pretty well. But again, I think, when I went to look up the game and get it in under my belt for this show, I ended up, on YouTube watching the 2021 Wake Forest Clemson game. And I was like, yeah, he looks a lot like he did last year. And then, realized what was going on. I watched, Saturday's game, and yeah, it was the same thing. It was, I think there are some really nice tools there. I mean, he's had some beautiful, arcing kind of rainbow throws with really good placement, right? Like drops in a bucket. But I also think, I know you mentioned, he's kind of had those tools. I don't, we talk about, Richardson, right? And a guy who's kind of inconsistent and flawed, but you look at the ball and it jumps off of his hands, and that thing looks like, I think I said the prettiest spiral that I've seen in a while, right? And then you look at DJ, and that thing like barely looks like it's spinning. It barely looks like it's getting there. And so I think there's some questions that I have there on like whether he's going to be able to kind of make those throws as he needs to. Otherwise, I think he's just going to have to be like a rhythm timing quarterback, which could work, but I think there's just limitations that you'll see. But hey, look, like he was completely written off after a really bad year last year, and I think what we're seeing here is that there's more than one side of a coin in a story, right? Like every story has a lot of different chapters. Some aren't going to look good. Some are the ones you write yourself, and you're as a protagonist, and you make your own story, and you write your way to where you want to be. And that's what this game was for DJ. And we'll see how, like, he has to build on it. He can't just live off of one game. But I do think after we've said that there might be some questions around Stroud and Young as well, but like we've talked about Richardson, and we might again, but again there's question marks after these top two quarterbacks, and I think it's up to these players to make a case for who is the third, the fourth, the fifth guy there, and it's going to have to be selling it to the team that drafts them too, right? Every team's going to look for something a little bit different too. And so I think that's what's going to make this a little bit fascinating, is we don't really know the landing spots and who's going to be looking for somebody yet and what they're going to be looking for. So it's really just breaking down what these guys can do at this point. And, when it comes to the draft cycle, it's going to be pretty fascinating to see, who's made their case the best, and there'll all be different cases.
Yeah, and you make a great point that Ulangalai still got a lot of areas to grow and improve, and he'll probably get a lot of opportunity to show it, right? Clemson's probably going to be in the hunt, and there's going to be big moments, big opportunities for him. And we're going to talk about another guy that unfortunately, he may be going the route of Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler, in terms of a guy who we thought was going to go round one or at least have a real chance. And now that probably might be dead already. And we're only in week 4 of the season. But Ulangalai is a guy that, he didn't put any of these games together like this last year. So that's something that the whole year went by last year and he didn't have any impressive performances. So it's nice to see him at least put this under his belt. I really came away impressed with Sam Hartman too.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that he's not going to be a guy that we're probably talking about as even, as a day 1 or probably even a day 2 pick, but he's pretty intriguing for a guy that maybe, can go on day 3, and for, like you said, what he was doing with Clemson's defenders in the backfield, was a greater degree of difficulty than what DJ was doing. So I came away really impressed. It's not very often you see somebody's offense do what Hartman and Wake Forest did to Clemson. They were scoring pretty much at will, and that usually doesn't happen with Clemson, who's probably going to have 4 or 5 guys, be early round picks in the NFL draft as well. So other than that, I came away really impressed with Hartman. Anything with Hartman before I kind of transitioned to a couple other guys?
Well, when I was watching through the game, I was trying to find A.T. Perry and look how he was doing and what his releases and everything looked like. So, and I wasn't able to kind of go down and just replay each play and look at the different, how it evolved for each of the different players. So what you're doing there is you're all of a sudden seeing, why are we 3 seconds in? Where's the ball? Oh goodness, he's breaking out of pressure. Oh, look at that throw out the run. Look at this decision making here. And so it's those things that kind of pop out and that make you want to go back for more and take a look at things. So, I have a watch list. I keep building on that watch list. So, he's kind of just he's put himself on that radar for me.
Yeah, for sure. So it's going to be interesting to kind of follow him. I kind of mentioned him before, but I think Tyler Van Dyke is the one, unfortunately, who is in great danger of a guy that was being talked about as a round 1 caliber prospect, a guy who was in every single one of those ridiculously way too early 2023 mock drafts that come out, days or day or week after the 2022 NFL draft concludes. But Van Dyke was there, right? For anybody crazy enough like me to read him, and plenty of people do, which is why every site, forces somebody to write them. They are really just a watch list. That's how they should be interpreted. But Van Dyke was on every one of them, and he went as high as top 5, top 10, top 20. But he was in every one of those first rounds. And I watched him, and I thought there was a lot of intrigue. But we talked about him a little bit last week when he really struggled. And now this week against, I think it was Middle Tennessee, he got benched. Miami lost 16 of 32, 138 yards and 2 interceptions. He's having a lot of accuracy issues, a lot of decision-making issues, a lot of ball placement issues. Last year, he kind of took over for another guy, and he came in and he seemed like he was playing very free and loose. And this year, right now, we're seeing a very, very different player than the guy who came in last year and didn't really have a lot of pressure on him. And I don't know if that's the cause or defenses and D coordinators. There's more film on him now, and now he's got to adjust. But whatever it is, Van Dyke, I don't know if he's just going to get his job back next week, and it was just an in-game benching. I think that's to be determined. But right now, I feel like if there's anybody in all of college football that has hurt their stock as much as anybody in terms of just the limited 4 weeks that we've had, I think it's been Van Dyke. There hasn't been really many good moments, and there's been a lot of things that kind of leave you like, this doesn't look like a guy, who should be going in the conversation and be a top 10 first round type caliber quarterback. And maybe he can change it around, and I hope he can, because I did like his game. But I think right now, there's a lot of stuff that he's got to develop and work on that we're seeing kind of, pop up this year as he was being talked a lot about more. So I think Van Dyke's an interesting one. And then also Cameron Ward. He was a guy that I was really intrigued by when I did the quarterback preview show before the season. Small school transfer to Washington State, playing in that Mike Leach style, offense. And this week, they ended up losing that game to Oregon in a battle. But he was 37 of 48 for 375 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's got athleticism to his game. He can throw from multiple arm angles. I'm really, really intrigued by Cameron Ward. And as we see the quarterbacks kind of the shuffle of rising and falling and rising and falling, I think Ward is a guy that could start to see his status as he continues to I think have a really good year. I think we can start to see his stock rise a little bit. So he's a guy I'm really looking at closely. Jeff, any quick thoughts on either Van Dyke or Ward before we kind of round out the quarterbacks, talking about the other marquee game, which was Florida and Tennessee, and a couple, obviously really intriguing quarterbacks there?
Yeah, I'll lead us into that game, but just quickly on Van Dyke. I mean, he's a sophomore. We talked about it last week. He might go back to school. He started off the season well, right? But we were looking at lighter competition. This is lighter competition last week, and he, it didn't look good. We talk together all the time. Development isn't linear, but you do need to be able to play well enough to continue to get reps, to continue to develop. That's going to be the thing to watch. Is he back out there? Is this a coach saying like, look, you don't have it today. Last week was rough. You came out, you don't have it. Let's fix something in practice and let's get you back out there. Let's see what happens. I'm with you. I don't. They call them way too early mock drafts for a reason, because most of it's going to be wrong. But yeah, let me lead us into Tennessee and Florida, and we had Mr. Good Game Bad Game Anthony Richardson, 24 of 44, 453 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 62 on the ground, 2 more touchdowns, losing effort because Hendon Hooker's on the other side doing 22 of 28, extremely efficient day for nearly 350 yards and 2 touchdowns himself, and another 100 yards on the ground himself. So, that game was fireworks. I've sworn off of talking about Anthony Richardson for a few more weeks. So I don't know if you touch on Hooker. He's definitely somebody, as Tennessee is show. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal that program is all of a sudden, something to watch for in college football right now. as they sort of march through on their quest to the playoffs. And I think that's going to get him, more notoriety, more eyeballs on him, as like we were talking about for DJ. But what about you, Paul? I've sworn off Richardson for 3 more weeks. So why don't you take the floor?
Yeah, I mean, listen, these guys almost put up 1,000 total yards. Like, I don't think I realized that when I was writing the numbers before. But if you do the math, they're like 30 yards short of 1,000. Like, that's what these guys did combined yesterday in offense. And I'll say this about Anthony Richardson, because we've said we're going to kind of let it play out a little bit. It was nice to see him have this type of statistical performance, because let's be honest, like, he just hasn't played a lot, right? He hasn't played a lot, so he hasn't had games like this. So to know that this is at least in your arsenal, that you can put out a 453 yard, 500 total yard offensive game against a team that's currently ranked number 10 in the country, that gets me just excited about the overall pedigree of why we're intrigued by Anthony Richardson, right? Like, it's not, we also want to see it turn into some level of production and not just be raw tools and things we've seen. So it's nice that he was able to do this and keep Florida. Unfortunately, they didn't win the game, but keep them in the game, right? They were like 10-point underdogs, I think, going in, or 9-point underdogs. So they weren't expected to win this football game. So he kept them in the game. He had a lead late in the game. Obviously Tennessee pulled away late. So I think it was it was nice to see him have a game like this to kind of help in that momentum that hopefully is building towards him being a big time, prospect. And I think this will be a game that we really circle back on when we kind of do another deep dive on him and say, like, have we seen the growth and development? Have we seen some growth and development that we want to, right? We're not expecting it to all the issues we know that we're worried about be magically gone. But I do think this will be a game where it'll give us an opportunity to really hone in on this game. But as for Hendon Hooker, he's a guy who, he's got the size, he's got the arm, really intriguing. Now, this is now 2 years now that he really played well last year. And now he's really hit the ground running again this year. Another guy that offers that dual threat capability. Hooker's another guy. I mentioned Cameron Ward before, but we could also just kind of throw Hendon Hooker in that mix. Is that I think Will Levis is kind of solidified for now that moniker of the third quarterback. But with Van Dyke struggling and Tanner McGee hasn't played as good as I think the expectations were, it's kind of up for grabs, like kind of what you were talking about. So I think a guy like Hooker, a guy like Ward, I think right now they're building positive momentum, right? We're talking about Van Dyke right now going the other way. Right now, it's only been 4 weeks. But I think Hooker and Ward their momentum is going upward, while Van Dyke is going down a little bit. Richardson, we have that human yo-yo a little bit, which is why we're kind of taking a little bit of a pause before we kind of evaluate where he's at in a couple weeks. But yeah, Hooker, I think, is a guy that I studied him after the scouting notebook came out. A couple people had asked me about him, and I was like, you know what, like maybe I'll do a deep dive on him. But he's a guy who I feel like is going to start, as Tennessee's now winning and turn the program around. I think Hooker's a guy who is going to start generating a lot more national buzz as Tennessee continues to play really well. And if Tennessee pulls a big upset or Hooker plays great in a game against Alabama or Georgia or something like that, it could be big, because he's got the arm talent, he's got the athleticism, he's got the strength, the size, the frame that you're looking for. For him, it's some of the quarterbacking thing, right? Decision making, going through progressions, but he was unbelievable in this game. So Hooker is a guy who I think is on the rise. I'm intrigued by him. And I think if Tennessee continues to play well, you're going to start to see a lot of buzz about Hendon Hooker in terms of his draft status.
Yeah, it starts with games like this, right? They'll profile this game on Sports Center. They'll show, you captaining a comeback and, pull out the win, and your name's on 10 o'clock PM, to national households. Eventually that's going to catch up to everybody. They're going, talking heads are going to need to have something to say about you. And, your buzz builds. That's what helps with the winning program. We hear that all the time, right? All the big names going into the draft usually come from marquee programs doing really well. You barely hear about players off struggling programs as far as, oh, they're going to be great players, right? They always go under the radar until you start getting into the meat of the draft cycle with maybe the combine is sort of where they start announcing themselves. So why don't we move it along to the running backs? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I think let's start with Zach Evans, because I see you added a little note here. So you got some information there that you read, that you found, that Kiffin said it was a medical thing, but Zach Evans only had 10 carries for 48 yards. Devy Quinshon Judkins had 27 carries for 140 yards. So I just thought it was kind of, noticeable that, Evans, 10 for 48. If it was a medical thing, it was a medical thing. I don't think it's much of a story, but he's had some good weeks, but I feel like, like as we've seen somebody like, Mo Ibrahim, who we've talked about a lot over the last couple of weeks, like every week putting that game out there, right? Like that says
Mr. 100 yards.
Yeah.
Right?
Like notice me, like every single week, like notice me. And, and I feel like we kind of thought that was going to be Zach Evans this year. And like, he's had his moments. But they haven't been as spectacular, I think, as we've thought they were going to be. And then again, if this is just a medical thing, it's a medical thing. If he was out there, he might have carried the rest of that big workload, or at least a big chunk of that Judkins did, and then maybe he would have been the one with 150 yards. And this is a non-story, but I do think it's at least worth mentioning that Evans, what is the medical thing? Is it something serious? Is it not? So I think that's something at least to monitor and follow. And any thoughts on Evans? Or I know we kind of usually break it up, but
this jumps out on the box score, right? So if you're looking through and you see this, it kind of like with Van Dyke, it raises an alarm, right? And so I had to go in and I had to look. I was like, hey, I didn't have eyes on this game. What happened, right? And it was sort of an after the game thing that it kind of came out. And so I don't know if there was a lot going on during the game where they talked about it. Obviously, with Judkins running well, nobody really notices a difference, and that's maybe something to talk about, right? Like if Judkins looking just as good, how much is Zach Evans looking good? And personally, from what I've seen when I go back and I watch him kind of on, back on Sundays and Mondays when I'm going back and getting some eyes on the games, I still think Zach Evans looks like the player that we talked about going into the season. I mean, I think he's explosive. You can contrast his production with a guy like Ibrahim, and I mean, like I said, Ibrahim's my guy right now. I'm flag planted on him pretty firmly, but Evans looks like a more dynamic player on the field, and he's going to get drafted ahead of him. That just by nature of how athletic he looks and his ability to hit big plays. So I think it's something to just note, because it hasn't only been this one game. I think Judkins, we mentioned him a couple weeks ago, actually, as when we hit things really quickly as far as the freshmen that were doing really well. I think we talked about it with Nick Singleton when he broke out too. Judkins, this isn't his first 100-yard game this year, right? He's already hit that this year. He's looking really good. They're already, I thought maybe it had to do with the opponents that they were facing, and that they're just looking to give the freshman a little bit of work and get him out there and get him acclimated. But I think this is going to go all year. I think you're going to see both of them out there, and Judkins looks really good. So maybe we can hit him on the Devy Slant a little bit, but I'd like to know sort of if we kind of juggle some names around, how much of a riser is he? Before we do that, let's hit at least the other three names we have highlighted here. So Blake Corum had himself a game. It was 30 carries, 243 yards. Gosh, I don't know how many touchdowns. It was like 4 or 5. It was something ridiculous. And then Achane is out there doing stud stuff with 19 carries, 159 yards, and 1 touchdown. And then the other one we had highlighted here is Deuce Vaughn. He had a 100-yard game, 25 yards, 116 carries. And opposite him, I think we had it, but was Eric Gray, who also had himself 100-yard game. And I think Vaughn and Gray are a good contrasting one, because when I went back and I watched that game, you're looking at them both sides, and you're kind of watching one, then you're watching the other, then you're watching one, and then you're watching the other. You can't help but have a natural comparison. So why don't you start and take this where you'd like to go first? And I'll certainly be able to circle around and have some notes on Vaughn and Gray.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that really stood out, and I thought was worthwhile talking about, is size doesn't really matter in terms of college football, in terms of handling heavy workloads, right? That's the thing that jumps at the page, right? None of these guys, I'll go out on a limb and say none of these guys from the Corum, Achane, and Vaughn will ever have that many rushes in an NFL game in their lives. Like Blake Corum's never touching the ball 30 times. Achane's probably never going to be a 19 carry a game guy, and Vaughn's not going to carry the ball 25 times. But what you're seeing is these guys are, while their roles in the NFL will be different, these are not the type of guys who are just space players. They're not just guys who are bid players. You're seeing them take the reins of their offenses and be the focal points. Devon Achane, I was kind of waiting for somebody else to kind of take the role of Isaiah Spiller, at least in some capacity, but it's not. Achane now is getting 18 to 20 carries, pretty much a weekly thing. Blake Corum, like in the game, that Michigan, was closer until late. They pulled away against Maryland. They showed it wasn't about splitting workloads, and they have other capable backs, but Corum was their offense. They weren't going to let this game slip away. 30 carries. They were, and then Vaughn, same thing. Big win for them over Oklahoma. And all of these guys, while all profile as short or small, they're all explosive in different levels of explosiveness. And Achane, it's more just that elite burst and explosion like that. Corum and Vaughn, I think more shiftiness. They have explosiveness too, but it's like shiftiness, making people miss. So all of those guys, and the other guy that's kind of thrown in the mix here, and then let you chime in a little bit. Travis Dye, he's slowly taking. He week by week now is solidified himself as the guy, and I thought it was going to happen because they thought he was way more naturally talented than the rest of the backs they had there. But what we didn't see Eric Gray do last year at Oklahoma, now he is. But what we didn't see him do last year when he got there was seize that backfield right away. Travis Dye is seizing that backfield. Yeah. USC won, I think, yesterday, mostly because Travis Dye was on their team. Not because Jordan Addison, I know we had one touchdown, not because Caleb Williams, who had a terrible game yesterday. Yeah. They won because Travis Dye gave him 133 yards on the ground. They played good defense too, which was part of it. But Dye was their best offensive player yesterday. And when you have Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison, that's saying something. Like that Dye was their best player on the field yesterday. So all of these guys, I think they're like draft status kind of varies. My guess is it might fall anywhere between round 2 and let's say round 4, or maybe even round 5 for a guy like Dye, even though I think he's more of a round 4 guy. But they all have different levels of, I think, what the NFL wants. NFL wants guys who can be multi-versatile in the pass game and the run game. They want playmakers. All of these guys are playmakers. They're versatile. They can impact the game as a receiver and as a and as a runner. I don't think any of these guys are going to be guys that you want to pound up the middle X amount of times. I think Gray, of all the guys, if we include Gray in terms of this list, probably is the best pure inside runner in terms of like body being able to withhold. But all of these guys, I think, are really intriguing, and you're seeing them just kind of take their offenses and carry it. Corum was the reason why Michigan won. Achane was the reason why Texas A&M pulled out that win against Oregon. Vaughn was a big reason of why they beat Oklahoma yesterday. Dye was a big reason why USC won yesterday. So it's impressive the performance they're doing. And it's not like their offensive lines are far superior, maybe Michigan's, than their opponent. So it's a lot on them as well.
Yeah, and we're spending a lot of time talking about the running backs because we might, I don't know if we want to highlight a couple names before we move off of them, but because the receivers are really not giving us much to talk about. And like you said, all of these running backs were the reason their teams won the game. And yeah, I'm going to take you talked about the size and frame for Gray as far as being an inside runner. And again, like I teased about it, you know, I'm watching Vaughn, I'm watching Gray, I'm watching Vaughn, I'm watching Gray. And, you know, Gray to me, again, this was one game through a really fast, it wasn't even like the full condensed film. Like this was sort of the highlights back and forth. And but I still saw Gray, you know, have the tendency to be a space player, right? Like that's where he's comfortable, is out in space when he can perceive things around him and put that all together. What is most impressive to me about Deuce Vaughn is, you know, I said it on Twitter this last weekend, you know, with the Devy, you know, folks chattering about it, but like his phone booth is the smallest I've seen. And what I mean by that is, you know, one of the things they say, can you make a guy miss in a phone booth, right? And, you know, you've got a linebacker coming up the gap and he's between you and where you need to be. Can you make him miss and get to where you need to go, right? And Vaughn can do that in such a tight space. Like, honestly, if he was bigger, I'd be almost tempted to say Christian McCaffrey like moves. Just it's the speed at which he makes his cuts and his transitions and sets people up. He doesn't gear down at all.
No, he doesn't decelerate at all.
He's more dynamic of a mover in my mind than Bijan Robinson is. And let's just break that down strictly as a mover, right? He doesn't have the frame, he doesn't have the bulk, he doesn't have, you know, he's not carrying as much, right? It, you know, different players, but I mean, I saw Vaughn go in and block a linebacker. So Martinez got a crucial first down. You know, I saw Deuce go in and go through and pick up, you know, through traffic, a first down at a critical 3rd and 2 moment. And he can get really small. Like he can get really small through the cracks and through seams. And I just want to see him at the next level. Someone's gonna put a comp out there to like Tariq Cohen or something, and they're not gonna have watched any bit of Deuce Vaughn because, or they're only gonna look at some highlight where he's juking somebody out in space because they won't be seeing what he's doing in between the tackles. And I think it's honestly, it's one of the most impressive things I've seen in this running back class is his between the tackles running. And it's just he's small. That's the only thing about it. But
he's gonna be such a fascinating case study for the NFL, because I understand we've broken down a lot of size barriers at the NFL, right? 5'10", 5'9" wide receivers going round one, quarterbacks who are 5'11", 6 feet going round one all the time. But like he's gonna be like the next like real like, what does an NFL team like? What are they willing?
He won't get 60% of a workload. He will have a complement. He might be the 40% guy, but who has more production. You know, as he has a running.
My early comp when I did in the summer was, and again, he's probably a better interior runner, but I never felt like Darren Sproles couldn't be a really good runner in between the tackles, because he wasn't. He was short, but he wasn't small in terms of like Darren Sproles could break tackles. Like Darren Sproles was low to the ground, ran with great mass in terms of like, you know, center of gravity and stuff like that. Like I don't know what an NFL team is going to look at Vaughn. They're going to probably look at him as like you said, a part-time player, but explosiveness and like
and he's not going to break tackles. That's going to be the problem, right? Like, I mean, that was the other thing I did charts most of his runs there, and you know, he's thrown down by a D lineman, you know, block. He can just kind of like reach off his block, grab him, and throw him down to the ground. It doesn't happen often. That's the thing, though, right? Like, guys don't get their hands on him.
No.
So, you know, it's again, it's not that he doesn't have lots of power, right? Like he's been able to do what you need to do when you need him to do it, right? Like he blocked that linebacker, he got his quarterback the first down. He's up the gut through traffic. He's able to finish through, fall forward, get enough yards, get the first down, right? So it's really how these players win, right? If you want him to be a a bruiser. If you want him to be Sony Michel for the Rams or for the Dolphins, like, he's not going to do that. But goodness, yeah, I will be really curious to see what his draft capital's like. But he will be a pretty dynamic weapon if the NFL lets him.
Yeah, and listen, to have that performance against Oklahoma, who now has a defensive-minded head coach, like it's something that stands out for sure.
No one's integrated their spatial awareness, right? Like I'm just kind of I'm going on a map tangent here, right? But it's all just clicking for me right now. It's like nobody can have that. One, nobody has the spatial awareness that he does, that proprioception, that knowing where everybody is, where they're turned, where the leverage is, and where he needs to go and what he needs to do with his body, and then integrates it with such a dynamic movement skill set that he has. Like, he can change directions. He has burst. He has amazing burst. As anything that, like, probably top of the class kind of burst, really good speed, and he can integrate all of those pieces together in the same bit as the mental game. And it's if size didn't matter, and I think there's an argument to say that it doesn't, but that's not what the NFL thinks. But if size didn't matter, he might be one of my top running backs in this entire class. Like, I think I could say he'd be ranked over Evans.
Yeah, I think he's an explosive player, and it's going to be interesting to kind of see how the NFL values him. But I think they're going to value him. Some teams going to value him in a way that they're going to be intrigued by the playmaking ability, and they're going to look at him as a guy that adds a lot to their team, adds a uniqueness to their team. He's going to be a guy that I think ends up going somewhere on day 2 and adds a new wrinkle to a team that's looking to add a new wrinkle, and they're going to enjoy having him as part of their offensive game plan for sure. Let's kind of round out the NFL draft stock report for this week with a little rapid fire in terms of the pass catchers, because there wasn't really a lot. So I'm going to kind of group some wide receivers here and tight ends, and Jeff, maybe you comment on one or two if there's something that you think is noteworthy. If not, you could take it right to the Devy Slant. Quinton Johnston, I mentioned him again. We've talked about him a few times. TCU scored 42 points this past weekend, and Johnson had 3 catches for 29 yards. TCU has had some good offensive games this year. Johnson just really hasn't came along for the ride. So for a guy who, was being touted as right there after Jackson Smith-Njigba and Keyshawn Boutte, and he was right there with Jermaine Burton as a guy that maybe could even push those guys. We haven't seen anything yet in terms of an explosive player, a big time, pass catcher, a guy that you would think, oh yeah, this guy's going to go in the top 20 picks of the NFL draft. So it's early, but he's left a lot to be desired in the early going. We haven't seen him put it together yet, even when TCU has good games like this past weekend, 42 points. Parker Washington, he reminds me so much of Jarvis Landry. Some in the Devy community are higher on him. I think he's a good player. I don't see really, really high ceiling. I see a guy that I like him, but I think he's more in the mold of a Jarvis Landry, who's had a very good NFL career. But I feel like people are looking at him and think his ceiling is even higher than that. I don't see it. Raheem Jarrett and Demas at Maryland. I bring it up because they really struggled against that Michigan defense, right? These are the kind of games you kind of want to see wide receivers, up against better level of competition perform. Raheem Jarrett, 4 catches for 12 yards. Demas, 2 catches for 12 yards. But the wide receivers actually intrigue me the most. Bru McCoy, the former highly, highly regarded USC recruit, 5 catches, 102 yards and a touchdown. He's starting to get it going there for the Volunteers, right? We talked about Hendon Hooker before. So I think Bru McCoy's a name to get back on our radar a little bit. I think I had him ranked as like my 21st wide receiver before the season started. But McCoy's starting to put things together there in Tennessee. And the way Tennessee's playing and the way Hooker's playing, McCoy's a guy who could be heard from a lot more the rest of this year. Julian Fleming finally got in the box score, 4 catches, 67 yards and a touchdown. The former number 1 receiver recruit that was highly regarded in Devy circles. We've seen him kind of fall behind, a couple other highly regarded underclassmen. So it was nice to see Fleming kind of make some stuff happened this past weekend. A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest. We talked about Sam Hartman a little bit before. 4 catches, 51 yards, and a touchdown. I think he's in the mix of like one of the top senior wide receivers, probably a guy we'll see it down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. And in terms of the tight ends, Michael Maye had his best game this year, 7 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. Notre Dame had a big win against UNC. Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan, 7 catches, 72 yards, and a touchdown. The reason why I bring him up, he's one of the best blocking tight ends in college football. He was on Dane Brugler's top senior tight end list. And again, mostly for his blocking acumen, but he's a guy who also has got some untapped athleticism. And when he puts a game together like this is a game that's going to stand out. This is a game that's going to get him drafted in round 4 as a blocking tight end, but them saying he does have some pass catching ability. So he's a name that you're not going to see in any Devy circles because he's not really a fantasy asset. But don't forget the name Luke Schoonmaker, probably a guy you'll see at one of the All-Star Senior Bowls, All-Star games in the like the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl. And then Dalton Kincaid, 4 catches, 66 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It's been a quiet year from the top-rated tight ends mostly. Kincaid was a guy who came in with a lot of publicity before the season started, but then his teammate Brent Keith was kind of outplaying him. So nice to see Kincaid scored 2 touchdowns this past weekend. Jeff, any quick thoughts on any of the receivers or tight ends, or it was just kind of like some things that jumped off at the box score for their production or lack thereof, and nothing really to dig deep in, and maybe just take this to the Devy Slant?
Look, I'm waiting for someone to, take the mantle here. It's wide open, and we don't have someone like a Jamison Williams or a Devontae Smith coming out, or we've got Rashee Rice right now is like carrying the banner for wide receiver production, and and so again, for me, I think traits are going to matter a lot more than stats when it comes down to the NFL draft. So we will definitely break them down that way, but you've got to produce on the field too. And we talked about the Maryland guys, right? Absent. So just we talk about see the Parker Washington, Quinton Johnston, right? Like we're waiting right now, and so I'm waiting for that. We'll see. From now it's just traits, and there's guys I like and guys I don't, and guys I think who carry something special to offer NFL teams, and until somebody really makes a statistical case to like change my mind otherwise, I'm gonna keep watching some Rashee Rice film.
Yeah. And I think we haven't seen anybody yet. I mean, we've seen Jordan Addison have some good games. We've seen Rashee Rice, obviously, but the wide receivers as a whole hasn't been nearly as impressive in the early going this year as we've seen in the past. So let's take this to Devy Slant. Honestly, I think the guy we talked about before a little bit, Quinshon Judkins out of Ole Miss, is probably the most impressive performance. 27 carries, 140 yards, really impressive. Like we said, the second time he's had a really good game. I think he's a guy that you want to have on your radar in Devy circles. And we know Kiffin likes to build an offense through a running back. I think Judkins could be that guy, even if Evans is the guy this year. He's the guy you're going to want to get on your teams sooner rather than later. What he's done so far has been impressive. Drake Maye, he had 5 touchdowns against Notre Dame, but UNC came away victorious. But I think Drake Maye now, he's put himself, especially with Caleb Williams this past week, struggling, against Oregon State. I think now the separation between a guy like Drake Maye and Caleb Williams, I think in terms of the underclassmen, I think is starting to really get thin in terms of Maye and Caleb Williams. I mean, what Drake May's done this year, I've been really impressed with. Caleb Williams, obviously, up until this game, had been really, really good. But he really struggled in this game. But I think it's more about what Maye has done this year than what Williams didn't do in this one game. But I do think May's really putting together quite the season, and he needs to be right at the top of underclassmen Devy quarterback rankings for sure. Will Shipley continues to look good, over 100 yards and a touchdown, and Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State, another 2 touchdowns, 118 yards. He's the reason why Julian Fleming, like some of these guys, haven't lived up, because the younger players like Egbuka are looking really, really impressive. So that's kind of what stood out for me from the Devy Slant. Jeff, any thoughts on any of those or anybody else you wanted to bring up? Because I didn't have a lot this week from the underclassmen that really jumped off.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were going to circle back, and I was going to maybe like go through your Devy rankings and like throw a couple names. Like touching on Shipley real quick, his touchdown was great. I mean, that was fighting through three different defenders to get the touchdown. And I saw he lined up in the slot and had a legit slot route, right? So we're not talking about the receiving back who's just flaring out to the flat and catching a flat and running up a sideline screen kind of thing. We're talking about a player who's really showing a multifaceted approach to the game. But maybe Quinshon Judkins. I don't know if you've seen too much of his film, but maybe even just on the production alone, like I keep kind of checking in on Kansas and seeing if Devin Neal is really showing anything. Would you at this point just by even from just the box scores, if you hadn't seen anything? I mean, obviously you've got to be somewhat impressive to do what Judkins just did. Would you take him over Neal now?
Yeah, I think I might, because what we've seen's been impressive, and what we know, I think Kiffin's there for at least a little bit of the long haul. What we know is he's going to give his guy every opportunity to be a focal point, and clearly, we've seen now multiple times him get a heavy workload. Whether it was game circumstances or whatever the case may be, and he is really been impressive in the performances that he's put forth out there, that he was highly regarded, and now he's living up to that really early on. And we probably didn't think with Zach Evans there that we were going to see much production this year. So yeah, I think I probably would, because I do think his arrow's pointing up. But sometimes at times in the Devy community, I think people are slow to react, and I'm more someone who's willing to react a little bit quicker. And with that, sometimes, you get somebody and then things settle back down. But I think also sometimes it gives you an opportunity to buy a little bit less than what another week or two will be, right? Like, so I probably would, prefer him and want to try to get him now.
Yeah, and I asked, it's really tough balance, right? Because I mean, you have freshmen come out and then fade away too, and then you have players that you were waiting on, and then they deliver on the hype. And I think just Devin Neal was an interesting name because I know he's got quite a few fans around the Devy community, and I said his name to aim a little high because I think from like a freshman perspective, Judkins is putting. You talked about Drake Maye closing a gap with a name like Caleb Williams, right? Like I think with what Judkins is able to step in and do right away as a freshman is closing the gap between him and a guy like Singleton. I think would be he'd be the right one to kind of, I think, pair together as freshmen. So,
and the other thing is, let's be honest, like we didn't really think we were going to see too much from him this year with Zach Evans there. And now what I think we've seen is, I think that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like
when you force yourself onto the field with a back in front of you like Zach Evans, like that's phenomenal. Like
I mean, Zach Evans was regarded by some as RB2 heading into this season in terms of talent and upside.
Still might be for me.
Yeah. And the fact that this guy is pushing his way onto the field, and I don't think they're just going to, like I said, I don't think they're just going to put it back in the, you're not going to just sit him on the sideline now and give Evans 25 touches. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think that speaks volumes. And if we start seeing like a 60-40 timeshare, I wouldn't be surprised. Because I feel like now that he's produced the way he has, now they're not going to just kind of hide that, because we haven't even seen Evans really produce like that. I mean, in his time at TCU and then early going at Ole Miss, like he hasn't had games that often that he carried 27 times and that type of production. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of a split backfield there for sure. And I think he has definitely closed the gap on some guys that might have maybe been a little bit more highly regarded for sure. So Let's take this to the NFL rookie report. Remember, we're recording on Sunday night, which is a little unusual. But it was kind of a ho-hum after last week. We had the Drake London explosion, the Garrett Wilson explosion. I felt like there was a lot to talk about. This week, I feel like there's a lot more. Last week, Chris Olave had all those air yards, but it didn't turn into much production. Well, this week, 9 catches, 147 yards. He's becoming a significant factor in that Saints passing offense. I don't think Jameis is it, but right now, Jameis is clearly locked onto Olave being a big part of that offense, and he is seeing opportunities in the intermediate parts of the field, and most importantly, he is seeing a lot of opportunities vertically down the field, which, Olave can win at all 3 levels, but that vertical game of his is why the Saints drafted him. They needed that. They needed to add that to their offense, and Olave is becoming a significant factor there. Damien Pierce continues to just seize control, showing that week 1 was just kind of a blip on the radar. This past week, 20 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. I think he had 1 catch for like 12 yards as well. So 21 touches for Damien Pierce. Rex Burkhead had less than a handful. It was the first week that Breece Hall out-snapped Michael Carter. So he had 8 carries for 39 yards, 6 catches for 53 yards. But I think we're starting to see, at least right now, my guess is when the dust settles as we go on, this is going to be more of a 60-40, 65-35 Breece Hall, Michael Carter. And I don't think it's a knock on Michael Carter. I just think Breece Hall is the guy they drafted 2nd round. They have high expectations for him. He's a little bit more explosive. So it's nice to see Breece Hall start to at least eat into that Michael Carter workload and actually see more touches and more snaps this week than Michael Carter. And then I put Jelani Woods down. Not that 2 catches for 13 yards is anything, but he came in as a very raw tight end. He had 2 touchdowns. He's a guy that in tight end premium leagues and 2 tight end leagues and leagues that you could stash guys and kind of wait. I think Jelani Woods' ceiling is very intriguing, especially at the tight end position. He's going to be a guy that I think is a guy that eventually will seize control of that Colts backfield, the tight end position, that depth chart. But I think it's probably going to be bits and pieces this year. But I think by next year, he might seize control of that and be the guy there. He's more talented than Kyle Granson. He's more talented than Mo Alley Cox. So a guy who was drafted, I think it was early 3rd round, before some of even the other more highly regarded tight ends. So it was nice to see him get 2 opportunities close to in the red zone and score those 2 touchdowns. So just kind of keep that name in the back of your mind if he's out there in a smaller dynasty setting, or you can get him, thrown in a trade or something and just kind of wait it out. I think he's an intriguing player, partially because of how productive he could be in the red zone, because he does create those mismatches. So, Jeff, any thoughts on Olave? I think he's probably the name that stands out the most, or maybe Breece Hall finally, eating in a little bit more to Michael Carter's workload, or Damien Pierce literally becoming the bell cow that I think we thought prior to week 1 before the Rex Burkhead game.
Thank you, Pierce, for, just week 1 was an alarm bell. You're going to find some value this year with him now, it seems like. With Woods, for me, tight ends, like, I just want to see the snaps, right? So let's break that down. And I didn't get tons of eyes on the games today. So as far as Hall goes, I have a big Zach Wilson question. So this is kind of what we saw, for the first 3 weeks. Him and even though he's kind of now done the outsnapped Michael Carter, like this is the kind of production we've seen with Joe Flacco behind the helm. And so what's going to happen with Zach Wilson? I'm quite curious.
Yeah, I think you're going to see the checkdowns dramatically different.
Yeah, and 6 for 53. That's 11 PPR points right there. Otherwise, you have 39 yards. That's a terrible fantasy day, right? So it'll be interesting. Olave, I had mentioned that, I had when Drake London, when we were earlier in the offseason, right after the draft, he was kind of my top rated rookie. And I think I mentioned last week that he just got bumped down at the very end, and he got bumped down for Olave. And it's just because, Olave is my draft crush there. And I am really excited to see him do well here. After I saw those air yards and those targets, I made a move And I moved Pickens in a second from a Devy league for Olave, and I had to throw him into my lineup this week, so that worked out. But speaking of Pickens, right? One question for you: whose catch was better, George Pickens or Odell Beckham Jr.'s?
Some people are going to say it's the homerism for being a Giants fan. I think because Odell's was a touchdown,
Yep.
I give it the slight edge for that, because he also had to
he had to get in bounds.
He had to do the inbounds, make sure he
didn't push off. He was he had the interference flag thrown too, and not on him because he pushed off, but he had some guy horse collar dragging him down. He had to get his feet in bounds because he was closer to the sideline. I mean, not to take anything away, right?
Pickens
made a phenomenal catch. I mean, he did his cleaner.
Yeah, picking between
right on
them.
The nose.
Yeah, picking between them makes you feel like you're saying one wasn't amazingly impressive, and it was. I don't know. I think I might go to my grave one day, and I'm not sure I'll ever see in the moment of a game a better catch than the Odell one. That I just couldn't believe. The announcers didn't even know he caught it. It was just that. To this day, I think that's the greatest act in terms of a play, not moment, I've ever seen, and we'll see if it could ever be topped at some point.
Odell was the influence, right? Now all the kids, I mean, you see it a lot more now.
Yes, and they practice it now before the games.
Odell, no one would think to even try it, and Odell pulled it out. So he was the first. He was the influence, and like any good artist, it spawns off a lot of variations and with everybody's own unique colors. And so Pickens is just another in that line, which I think a highlight. The fact that we're talking about is it better than Odell's means it's the greatest catch we've seen since Odell, I think.
Yes, for sure. So Pickens is going to be really a guy that we talk a lot about. I don't know how much early on this year. I think late this year. I think when Kenny Pickett gets in there, we might be talking a little bit more about him. But I like the trade you made. I would have made that trade as well. But I do think George Pickens is going to be a guy that has a really, really good career as well. But I do like Olave a little bit better. I said it all draft season. To me, he had the best traits of Will Fuller and the best traits of Terry McLaurin mixed together. And that's pretty impressive, right? If you can have that route running and smoothness of McLaurin, but then also have the vertical capabilities of a guy like Will Fuller, I think that's kind of where Chris Olave lives. Obviously, a lot of people that we really respect in the industry also loved him as well, including Matt Wallman and many others. So I think his arrow is pointing squarely straight up. Let's close out the night with the Dynasty Stock Report, because I do think there were some interesting things that took place today as we're recording this Sunday night. And let's start at the quarterback position, because we talked a lot about Jalen Hurts last week, so we don't have to get into him again. But what he's doing is remarkable. And just to kind of show you where you can't be so resistant to change and change pretty quickly when needed, I moved him up. I already had moved him up. Remember I told you last week I was going to move him up. I now moved him up to number 4 in my Dynasty quarterback rankings. And that is bold and aggressive, but I don't think he's going anywhere now. See, the thought of me always being lukewarm on his quarterback ranking was, if Philadelphia didn't believe in him, why would another team believe in him? Is he going to be a backup in a year? That's gone. If for some reason the Eagles, don't believe in him yet, which I don't think that's the case, another team squarely would, based on what we've seen him. He's improving as a passer better than I ever even thought he was going to get. Is he still the greatest passer ever? No, but neither is Lamar Jackson at times. Neither is Kyler Murray at times. But what he is he's shown a tremendous amount of progress and growth in his passing. And that started the year he went to Oklahoma. He showed tremendous growth from his time at Alabama, where we knew he was athletic. We knew he was a gamer. We knew he was smart and had all the intangibles. Then we saw him start growing as a player and a passer at Oklahoma under that Lincoln Riley. And then we're kind of seeing the same thing, right? It was very, very basic stuff early on in his career in the NFL. And now we're starting to see him advance a little bit in terms of what he's capable of. That, to me, the rushing and passing combined production, the setup there now in Philadelphia makes me want to be all in on him now. That to me, besides Josh Allen, Mahomes, and Lamar for fantasy, for dynasty, I think I'd want Jalen Hurts right now fourth over Kyler Murray and then over the Herbert Burrow pairing as well. Because I've watched a lot of Arizona the last couple of games, and maybe things will be different when there's a new play caller there. And I've never been a Kingsbury fan, but right now, like everything Kyler Murray does, as impressive as it is, seems so challenging and so difficult. Yet Jalen Hurts, it seems so easy. It's like what they're doing right now in Philadelphia, starting to look easy like it does at times for, when Josh Allen started to make his big growth, when Lamar started to make his big growth. We're starting to see it seem like everything's slowing down for Jalen Hurts. Everything's improving with Jalen Hurts, that I want to be aggressive getting him now. And the other thing that I said was, I don't know about other people, but to me, I don't think anything below top 3 anymore for Lamar is doing him right. I think he's got to be in top 3s. I think the better question that we now got to start asking is, does he belong to be number 2 after Josh Allen and not number 3 after Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes? I don't know where your take is kind of on that. So maybe any quick thoughts on the quarterback situation there? Is it too aggressive on Hurts? Do you still, what do you think about Lamar? Should he be right after Allen? Do you still think he should be behind Allen and Mahomes?
So, I had a startup, right before, the year in late summer, and I had to make the bold call of taking Lamar over Joe Burrow, over Kyler Murray, right? I've seen his MVP season. I've seen his quote unquote down year when he was quarterback 9 or 10. And if that was, I think, the 2020 season where things were inflated across the board and, Baltimore just, had some weird rut going on. But, his points, even in that season, were average-ish for Lamar and would have been the quarterback 2 numbers in any other season, right? It was just that the 2020 year just had all these inflated passing numbers. And so, yeah, I think Lamar is squarely in that top tier. I think where I'm different than you mostly is that I'll put Herbert in that top tier. And that necessarily means that I'm also putting Herbert over Hurts still. And I get it though. I was kind of rattling off the names when you said 4. I was like, okay, that's over Burrow. Okay. I get that. You've got this rushing upside, right? That's over Kyler. I'm like, well, Kyler's struggling when I talk about, and I think I talked about it with Kyler last year when he was on his ascension, right? And they said, hey, look, before we crown Kyler top 1, top 2, top 3 quarterback, right? Because that was kind of the conversation 1 year ago when he was the top scoring quarterback in fantasy after 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, somewhere in there. My statement there, and this will apply to Hurts too, is that, when a quarterback goes through their development, the defenses are going to adjust. Defensive play callers are going to adjust. They're going to make things challenging. It's going to be a constant battle, give and take. And you're going to see them go through these ruts, and you're going to need to see them step through and go out of these ruts. I don't think we've seen that with Jalen Hurts yet. So for me, we haven't seen him adjust to defensive play callers doing everything they can to shut him down. And I'm sure that's what you're saying. Like, why wouldn't everybody try to shut him down now? There's going to get some tape. There's going to be a book. There's going to be a part of his development and growth where things aren't easy, just like we're seeing with Kyler. And Kyler's struggled through these for big stretches. So that's why I don't have any problem putting Hurts in that tier and even taking him above him. Not at all. I'm just saying, hey, that point is coming for Hurts. And I don't know. There's a few players that I might be wrong on in it, and it didn't come. And you maybe say Pat Mahomes had to deal with it when defenses went too high on him and he learned to be patient. That was like 2 games, And the other one I don't think I've seen it yet with is Herbert. But from what I've seen him string together year to year to year and the progress, I don't know. I think he's on a similar Mahomes track where the way that defenses adjust to him, it's a 1-2 game adjustment for him. to go back to it. And I think that's why he's in my top tier in the Ascension. So that's kind of how I order things. Yeah. If top 4 quarterbacks, putting Herbert up in there, and then throw Hurts in that tier with Burrow, Kyler, Watson, or, whoever else, ends up being, Dak or whoever else you want to put in there. I certainly think, as I keep going further and further down the list of names, the more and more I'd just want to see Hurts in the upside, and even just due to the rushing, right? Like even if he stops progressing as a passer and he's not going to be on a level like a Josh Allen, like a Lamar, even if he doesn't get to Lamar's level as a passer, he's still going to be an incredibly valuable fantasy asset. And he's good enough now to be an extremely valuable NFL asset. And that's what you need for your longevity, right? Is can he be an asset to an NFL team? And you've laid out the argument well. I think we have a definitive answer to that, and it's yes.
Yeah, and I mean, you can make the case he's set up with his pass catchers as good as anybody right now in the entire NFL, besides maybe Tua, but like we don't even
Burrow, yeah.
And Burrow, yeah, sorry, yeah, and Burrow and Tua would be the only other 2 guys that are probably set up better than him. And I'm going to bring up Devonta Smith momentarily, but he's set up there. Those guys are going to be there for at least the next like 4 years there, as he will have some of these downs, right? And those guys will be really helpful to have, to kind of help him get over those adjustments that he'll have to make, that inevitably will come. The only other quarterback thing is as someone who is a huge fan, I'm not writing him off. But the concern level now for Justin Fields is at a level of this whole year is going to be. We talked last week about the unfortunate Lance injury, right? And it's a whole year of his development completely stunted, right? And he doesn't get to play, and he didn't play much in his last year in college. So now, like, expectations next year, and it's been like how many years? It'd be like 4 years, right, since he really played meaningful football. Well, Justin Fields, I mean, they're not even trying to really develop him. I mean, 8 passes, 8 completions. When he does, like he seems like he's very tentative. 2 interceptions today. They're like, I just don't know where we go. Any expectations moving forward, it's just blind faith on what we thought about this kid as, a collegiate prospect where I loved him. But he's not going to be with Chicago next year. I don't think. Like, I think that I almost feel like definitive about that. They didn't show any want to during the offseason to try to help him and say, okay, most important thing this year is to help him grow. They didn't bring an offensive minded head coach. They didn't invest in an O-line in free agency or early, like big part of free agency or early in the draft. They didn't, get him really any playmakers besides a 3rd round pick on an older prospect in Velus Jones. And now it's like they're not even letting him just say go out there and take the lumps, but throw the ball 35 times. Like, and I don't know what we do with him in Dynasty. I think if you have him, you probably just hold on to him because you can't give him away now because you're gonna get nothing back in return. But I think now, like, we're talking about another team's just gonna take a flyer on him. My guess is where this is going. And when I take a flyer on, listen, the Jets got like a 2nd and a 4th for Sam Darnold. So there might be a team that needs a quarterback that still believes in him. So he'll get another chance for sure. But how many times quarterback is not tight ends. We don't often see quarterbacks leave somewhere and thrive somewhere else, right? That's not normal. So I think the expectations have to be carefully thought through when you're talking about a dynasty circle. And it's unfortunate because I really do like the player a lot. But once the regime who drafted him is no longer there, I think it changes everything. And that's kind of where we're at with Chicago. Bad team, bad O-line, minimal weapons. And they just look like they're just like asking him to like kind of be a caretaker this year, pass as little as possible. Maybe they steal some wins. I mean, they're 2-1 now, and he's basically had no impact on those 2 wins. I don't know. I know you were right there with me. You were intrigued with Fields. You like the potential, but what do we do with him? Do we just hold on to him and kind of wait it out for him to maybe get a new landing spot in a year? Because he's only regressing. He's not developing.
Honestly, like, I would want to wait it out, mostly because, I've seen the talent and I want good things for the guy. But if you want to actually like plot it out and say, what is his stock going to do over the next, treat it like a company that you're buying stock in. What's his stock going to do if you plot over the next 10 to 12 months? Like, is it going to be as good as it is today? No, probably not. So get out, get what you can, because it's probably not going to get better. And the reason it's not going to get better isn't on Justin Fields. Like, it's a criminal what Chicago's done to him, what Matt Nagy did to him, what their front office is doing to him now. Like, your top pass catchers are Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet, and they're nowhere to be found. So, it just, we saw a couple flashes. We've seen when the offense is tailored to his strengths that he could be a really good player. And this just kind of feels like trying to fit, a player into a scheme where the fit just isn't there. And, and then I think when you start looking at, okay, a new landing spot or wherever else happens next for him, is a team, like you said, the teams paid second and fourth for Darnold, but they've paid for Darnold and asked him to come in and just run what they do, right? That's not an investment where they want to build around the player, right? This isn't like Kyle Shanahan drafting Trey Lance and changing the offensive scheme. I mean, you heard Jimmy Garoppolo talk about how the offense was completely different when he stepped into that game, right? This isn't an offense designed around somebody that you've invested multiple first round picks in. Although it should be, because that's what Chicago did, right? Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, if a team trades for him, I'm not sure he's going to get that in his new home, right?
That's it. They're not going to put multiple first round picks. They're not going to spend enough where they feel like they need to build around this guy. Like, he's going to have to. He's got a lot of work ahead of him. Like, he's going to have to work harder than it's a headwind. He's going to have to work harder, twice as hard as anybody else, to adapt his game to something that isn't his game. It's basically like Trey Sermon, right? He had to change and adapt his game to Kyle Shanahan, started doing that, and then they're like, all right, cool, you're the best player in camp. Cool, we're cutting you now. Like, that's what's in store, and that sucks.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is, he might have to get a little lucky. Like, again, just using this because it's something close to me, is like, if the Giants move on from Daniel Jones, but they find their way to 8 or 9 wins this year, and they're not in position to draft like the guy they want in the draft, would they be open to trading a day 2 pick and seeing what they can do with Justin Fields? Maybe Joe Shane and Brian Daboll liked him in their draft class, cool. But obviously they weren't going to draft the quarterback in Buffalo, but they scout everybody, right, to kind of get a feel for them. Maybe they like them, and he does kind of fit what Daboll's scheme likes to do, like, you know what I mean? So unless
that's a coach that would scheme around, like, that's a coach that does enough to build around the talents of their players to put them in successful positions, right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
You hear players talk about that with coaches sometimes, right? And players know what's up, right? Like, they know what they can do. They know when coaches ask them to do something they're not great at. They know when they're doing well, and when, a lot of times they know when they're doing well, that, the coach is listening to them and listening to their advice, right? That's the landing spot where I think you're going to see Field stock continue to go down, because he's not going to be the starting quarterback in Chicago next year. And what you'll have to see is when he leaves, where he goes, what type of coach is that? Is that a Daboll-like coach, or is that a Matt Nagy-like coach?
Yeah, or is it going to Carolina, or is it going to
Seattle? Rule won't be there, but
Rule won't be there. That'll be a new regime. But you know what I mean? Like, is Seattle? Does Seattle go get him? Because Seattle's not going to build an offense for him. Daboll might build an offense for him. So
that's like the one landing spot. I couldn't think of one, but when you said that for the Giants, I was like, okay.
Yeah, like
I'll be in if that happens, but that's 1 in 32 right now.
yeah, exactly. Like, so like he's going to need to get very lucky to land somewhere in his second spot that's willing to maybe say, okay, this is what he can do. I'll build my offense around that. Most likely he's going to end up somewhere that, like you said, he's going to have to try to learn and show that he can fit in another scheme. And we've seen Chicago try to force him down to that scheme last year. It didn't work. We thought maybe this year they would create a different scheme. But even when I watched that game, they're not doing much with his legs. They're not getting him going by doing a lot of RPO stuff and moving the launch point. They're just not. They're trying to hide him, if anything, not build an offense around him, which is ideally what you would want to be doing for a guy you invested 2 first-round picks in and theoretically should be the face of your franchise. Instead, they're trying to hide him. So I don't want to think it's a sunk cost in Dynasty, but like I made some moves in my ranks and I put Tua over him, like things that I would have never thought I would have done just even a couple weeks ago. But now, like, I have to be practical. If Tua is the quarterback for Miami for the next couple of years and he gets to throw the ball to Tyreek Hill and Waddle, he's probably going to be decent in fantasy. Right now, I don't know if Fields is ever going to be decent, right? So it's like, so it'll be interesting to kind of see. It's going to be a long road to get back to what we thought he might be. Not this injury circumstance of a guy like Trey Lance, but interesting nonetheless that same draft class, kind of feel like a couple wasted years in their careers now for different reasons, obviously, in very different teams in terms of a successful one with a good quarterback or at least a good veteran quarterback in Garoppolo and then an injury compared to Fields' situation. But nonetheless, interesting to kind of see how those guys come back down the line in terms of.
Yeah, if you could trade Fields for Lance, I'd do that, right? I think maybe you could sell it like, well, they both have big question marks about their future. I get that, but at least one guy's producing this year. I mean, when I look at where they're going to be in 12 months, one's going to be higher, one's going to be lower. So
yes, agree. Let's just rapid fire. I'm gonna run off a couple names here, and then you kind of go wherever you want. Khalil Herbert, who I've been a fan of for quite some time, seized the opportunity given to him today in that Chicago backfield and that Chicago offense, as we were just talking about with Justin Fields. David Montgomery goes down an injury. Khalil Herbert, 20 carries, 157 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Absolutely goes off. Probably, I'm going to say it's because yesterday I traded him away as much as I love the player. I was in a win now team, traded him and a first-round rookie pick for Gabe Davis, who I do like a lot. But nonetheless, right after I do that, Khalil Herbert, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns. He is going to be the starter in Chicago next year. Justin Fields won't be, but Khalil Herbert will be. They will not re-sign David Montgomery and spend big money on a running back in free agency. Khalil Herbert, anytime a guy gets opportunity last year and now this year, just looks tremendous. Another Matt Waldman favorite, I think, from last year, if I'm remembering correctly. But he's got his supporters. I like Herbert's game. Devonta Smith, I brought him up before. He was doing things today like he was winning at the catch point multiple times today, tremendously. If he's going to start adding that to his arsenal, we already know he's a really good route runner, really good separation quickness, really good hands. But he was winning. Like there were a couple plays where at first, like it was on, like I was watching the game mix, and like I was like, that must have been AJ Brown, just because the way he went up and got it. And then like the red zone went over to it, and I saw the plays, and I was like, oh my God, that's Devonta Smith doing that. Like the guy that we were so nervous about, his 168-pound frame, is literally going up and winning catch point contested catches. I think the fact that he's now doesn't have to be the alpha I think is something that is going to be so beneficial to Devonta Smith's early portion of his career, because he would have been the focal point of every defensive coordinator when they face Philadelphia. But now he's like an afterthought, basically, because they're so worried about AJ Brown, who rightfully so is a stud. But that's just going to open up for Devonta Smith. I think, I don't know if the volume will be there to support him as like a high-end top 24 type dynasty wide receiver. Probably not. But I think he'll settle in as a good wide receiver 3, especially as Jalen Hurts continues to grow more. Curtis Samuel, I would love to hear your takes. If, former second-round pick, signed a pretty big contract with Washington, his former coach there, and then injury last year, but I mean, they're using him. His usage has been phenomenal the first couple of weeks. Is it sustainable? I know Dotson, Jahan Dotson's there too. So I'd love to hear your take maybe on Samuel. And then I put stock down, Darnell Mooney. I don't even think we have to get into that. We know why that stock's down right now, but this is going to be a lost year in terms of owning him, I think, in fantasy. So you're losing out on a whole year basically. And then DJ Moore, we thought the Baker Mayfield edition was at least going to rise him up. And if anything, it seems like it's hurt him now. And now, DJ Moore, he was really moving up there in dynasty ranks, and I had him pretty high too, and I still have him pretty high. But I'm a little concerned that this is going to be pretty much not a year that I thought he was going to be like high wide receiver too. I think right now this might be more of a year that he's in that wide receiver remix, which is not really where you want to be because that fluctuates week to week. So I think it has to be a little stock down on him. So any thoughts on any of that? You can kind of go wherever you want between Herbert and Smith and Samuel, or to stock down guys if you have anything you want to add to Mooney or DJ.
Yeah, DJ Moore it's a cautionary tale, right? Everybody says it can't get worse than blank, right? It can't get worse than Sam Darnold. It can't get worse than noodle-armed Ben Roethlisberger, right? I mean, you're talking about saying you lose a Hall of Famer in Ben Roethlisberger and you think Mitch Trubisky or a rookie Kenny Pickett is going to be better than that. It's just, I think people have a wellspring of optimism coming out during summer, and every team has upgraded, right? And that's why DJ Moore is going to really take off this year. He's a good player. He's until he gets a good quarterback, and especially one that'll like actually focus on him and give him the targets, right? Baker just doesn't seem to care about feeding his talented wide receivers, which is just a shame. And it's not going to make him successful, right? Like have others help you. Curtis Samuel is an interesting one because I am a big Jahan Dotson believer, and Jahan Dotson has looked amazing, right? Like his catches are off the charts already. Like I see Dotson supplanting Curtis Samuel as a better focus for that offense. That being said, like this is the same coaching staff where Curtis Samuel broke out as a Carolina Panther. And it took him a while, right? It took him a while from injuries during his first couple of years in the league too. And so I don't think we're going to see this sustain by one way or another, whether it's a talent thing, whether it's an injury thing, or just a way that their offense will evolve, right? That's going to evolve throughout the season. So, I think this is a great opportunity to, sell high, but we've also seen, this kind of happen for a season or so, like with a JD McKissick kind of role, right? And he's, at least for now, he's starting in your fantasy lineup. You've got to play him, right? And that's a really good position for a piece that was sort of an afterthought. And then I just, want to champion Khalil Herbert because he's been one of those guys that have always kind of been the guy that I want to get thrown in on a trade. And unfortunately I'd had to throw him in on a few other trades as like the throw in. And now I don't have him on my roster, which makes me sad. I don't think the Chicago coaching staff is anything to write home about. We talked about it with Fields. Like Montgomery's going to be healthy. They're going to go straight back to him. This is like an Alexander Madison, Dalvin Cook thing, except if the talent levels were so much closer. Like Montgomery is a very, very good back. I don't know if he's worth paying oodles of money on a second contract, but I mean, you watch what he did last weekend and he was phenomenal. I mean, it wasn't enough to win the game against Green Bay, but he was really good. I think it was like leading the league in broken tackles per attempt or something like that until Nick Chubb played Thursday. But so I think you're going to just see I don't know what the injury's like. I did a quick search and it was lower leg, his ankle. It could be a few weeks. Then, Herbert's if he gets the opportunity, he's going to produce, and he's hopefully not one of the backs like Alexander Madison, who always produce when given the opportunity, but never get a role. Hopefully he's more along the lines of the Turner, right? Michael Turner, who kind of made it somewhere. Let's cross our fingers.
Yeah. And listen, I think Montgomery's a solid back. I think he's a good back. But to me, watching Montgomery to Khalil Herbert is the same thing I felt over the last year and a half, maybe even 2 years when I watched the Cowboys. There are things that Ezekiel Elliott does better, but when you just watch Ezekiel Elliott run and then you watch Tony Pollard run, there's a clear difference in who offers more juice and who offers more explosion. And that doesn't make or break running backs, right? If it did, that would be the only thing we care about. But you could see, when I watch Khalil Herbert, I'm really intrigued by him. I liked him at Virginia Tech. He fell to day 3, but he took advantage last year when he got it. So I'm a fan of his. I would try to get him as soon as Montgomery comes back, and especially if he takes that lead role back. Every one of your leagues, everyone should be trying to go out and get Khalil Herbert on the cheap, 3rd-round rookie pick, thrown in another deal. Try to get him now, because come the offseason, Montgomery's going to leave. And I don't think they're going to invest much. They'll bring in somebody else, obviously, but I think they're going to give Khalil Herbert every opportunity to be the guy next year. I know it's not the same regime that drafted him, so maybe that'll hurt him. But if he performs in glimpses, I think he might get a real opportunity there, so they can build up the rest of that team, not spend many resources at the running back position, and hone in on the other areas that they need for sure. So, Jeff, there it is. Dynasty report for this week. A lot of interesting things there. Hopefully you are enjoying these 4 segments that we are bringing to you each and every week. If so, please get over to the website, SS Football. Fastest and quickest way to get there. Check out our premium content tab. And for $9.99, you get access to all 3 of our premium notebooks. Scouting notebook updated all year. They'll have it has close to 100 prospects already in it. Rankings notebook, all our different rankings for all the different things. Devy, Dynasty, rookie, Dynasty, positional for Dynasty, draft eligible, Devy, all that. And then the draft projections notebook next April as well. So, Jeff, any parting shots before we call it night?
No, let's wrap it up.
Absolutely. So, on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, Devon Achane, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.